Welcome back to Neon Galactic, a YouTube podcast produced by PBS affiliate Keat TV in Eureka, California. I'm your host, James Falk. Thanks for joining us. Before we get started, I want to remind people that if you like this content, these conversations with great and startling minds on the frontiers of thinking about UFOs, consciousness, high strangeness, and idealism as more than a quaint philosophy, remember to like this video and subscribe to this channel. Public television is a nonprofit enterprise and as such can always use your support. Today's video is going to be good. In a few moments, I'll be joined by Ray Hernandez, a tax attorney hailing from Florida and now Colombia, who has done an immense amount of work over the past decade in researching the phenomenon behind UFOs, NHI, near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, and other stripes of what he describes as contact modalities. After several experiences that shattered his previous notions on the breadth and reach of physical reality, he turned those episodes into a sort of call to action. He's now written several foundational volumes on the subject, both with the Consciousness and Contact Research Institute, of which he is the director, and as a member of the Edgar Mitchell Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial and Extraordinary Experiences, or FREE. One of these volumes, importantly, included a statistical survey of roughly 4,300 UFO contactees and their experiences, the first of its kind collection of reports that helps to cut through so much of the misinformation and falsehoods that seem to surround these topics. His overall view can be broken down into a couple of primary points: that consciousness is primary in the universe, where we're part of a greater system of mind that could be likened to God. He and his fellow experiencers and academics within the CCRI have also come to view the entire spectrum of so-called paranormal phenomenon as different ways that human beings have made contact with this greater reality, the so-called contact modalities mentioned previously. They're all elements of an overall truth that we're just now coming to realize exists within, around, and through each one of us. I've been pursuing this conversation for a long time. In prior interviews with Matthew Roberts and Diana Pasulka and Nick Cook and Tristan Maduro and Jeffrey Mishlove and Bernardo Kastrup, among others, the primacy of consciousness has become a theme that seems to unite the various threads of this conversation. Through the several books that Hernandez has edited or written himself, he lays out a sort of outline that points to a greater reality than what our senses typically encounter. As both a virtual and spiritual reality, this complicated realm generates the phenomenon that so intrigue us on this channel and provides the mechanism by which they seem to manifest for particular individuals. I'm thrilled to welcome Ray Hernandez to the show.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction.
No problem. I think this is an absolute privilege to be able to talk to you. You've done a lot of thinking on this topic that I think has helped shape the way that we're starting to think about it now, and I also think the way that we're going to be thinking about it more and more in the future. So I know there's been some technical hurdles getting this done, but now we're both here and we have a conversation to have, and I'm very excited. So
I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So let's start from the beginning, before all this happened. I mean, can you describe a little bit about who you were, what kind of life you were leading, and then, just to sort of get into the subject, what happened? How you ended up on this road that you're currently on?
Surely. I was an overeducated materialist, rationalist, agnostic. I had gone to Cornell for a master's degree. I attended UC Berkeley for a PhD. And then I later on became an attorney, and I was working eventually for over 25 years with the IRS as an IRS tax attorney. I was dealing with estate taxes, which is auditing the inheritance, basically, of the multimillionaires and billionaires. It was very complicated, detailed tax work at the highest level. And then one day in 2012, March of 2012, my ex-wife and I had a joint encounter in our living room with what I now describe as a non-human intelligence. It was energetic. It was a pure energy, semi-translucent, roughly like a rectangular shaped, 2.5 feet in width by about 1.5 feet in height, semi-transparent, numerous colors inside of it. And this intelligence um, put me to sleep, made my wife disappear, and our dog, who we were going to be euthanizing later that afternoon. She was completely paralyzed from a stroke. And we had an appointment later that afternoon to put her to sleep with our vet, Dr. Phil Cruz. And then an hour later, when I woke up, the dog was running around the living room. My wife had popped back into reality, and she had what is commonly called 1 hour of missing time. And the dog was completely cured from a stroke. And later on, a dear friend of ours, Dr. Joseph Burks, and Preston Dennett, who has written several books on UFO medical healings, they authored. I asked them to author a chapter for our book Beyond UFOs, which had 12 case studies. And my personal experience was one of the case studies. Another one was another medical doctor that Dr. Joseph Burks interviewed. And I would say maybe half of the people were professionals. These are college graduates, people with master's degrees, even people with other advanced degrees. And so they encountered very similar experiences to themselves. And so in our survey question that we did ask in our the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Free Experiential Research Study, which we can go into the details later on, we found out that 50% of the people, of the 4,300 people that had seen a UFO and had contact with a non-human intelligence, 50% of these people also had a miraculous medical healing, either on themselves or a close member of their family. So this is not an unusual phenomenon. This is actually part of the core. If you have UFO contact, 50% of the people are going to have some type of miraculous medical healing. And so since that day, my whole worldview came crashing down, because I had worked as a professor for 6 years. I was now working with the IRS at the highest level as a tax attorney. And as I said before, I was a materialist. And then through a series of ongoing experiences, the intense part of it lasted 4 straight years. I quickly realized that my materialist mindset had to be corrected, because I was totally wrong, and most of humanity is completely wrong, and that we're more closely aligned with the theories of Bernard Castro, and he's just one of them. Our 2-volume book, A Greater Reality, has over 45 academics and medical doctors that have written about different aspects of the concept of idealism as it relates to the paranormal contact modalities, which all of the 40 individuals view as one integrated phenomenon under consciousness. So that's where I started from, and that's where I am currently at right now. So I could take you through intermediary steps based upon your questioning.
Yeah, no, that's great. Having read Mind of God and some of your other writings along with that, you seem to describe an ongoing series of synchronicities, or what you perceived as sort of arranged occurrences that led you not only into this experience and the realizations that brought, but a series of encounters and relationships with other people who've had similar experiences, who all kind of helped you to shape and frame your own. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's as I said earlier, that initial experience triggered a series of paranormal experiences involving out-of-body experiences, astral travel experiences, direct contact with various forms of non-human intelligence. Only one was physical. And I realized through the Dr. Mitchell Free Experiential Research Study, which we can go into detail in a couple of minutes,
Yeah.
was that the overwhelming majority of the individuals that have had UFO contact experiences, roughly 80% of these individuals, had a series of diverse paranormal contact experiences after their very first UFO encounter. So this is a very common phenomenon. And then when we got to interviewing some of the major experiencers from our database, and once I got to meet a lot of individuals one-on-one, once I began speaking at conferences, individuals would come up to me, and some people would just contact me outside of the conferences. And I got to know in depth some of the lives of these individuals. Now, mind you, 4 of them are medical doctors that became very close friends of mine. These are major contact experiences. For example, I'll highlight one, which is she's in our book, Volume 1 of A Greater Reality. Dr. Melinda Greer is a pediatrician, board certified pediatrician in the state of Oklahoma. She worked as a pediatrician for approximately 25 years, and she just recently retired. She has seen 14 UFOs, and most of them were not material. There were some that were physical, but different shapes, different forms, and very profound experiences. These were these huge objects that she saw, roughly half of them with her husband. She also had 2 near-death experiences. Her first one was when she was 7 years old, and her second occurred while she was a medical doctor. And that was a profound NDE, one of the most profound ones I've ever researched or come across. She's also had numerous out-of-body experiences, numerous astral travel experiences. After her second near-death experience, just like so many NDE experiencers, she began to see deceased people. And because she worked in a hospital, she saw many dead people, going through elevator doors, going through walls, going right through people, and numerous type of communications with these entities, and many other paranormal experiences. And for many, many years, all of her life, she kept quiet. She would never speak with anyone about her experience. And I was like that for about 1.5 years.
Yeah.
Because once you start mentioning your experiences to some of your friends, they think that you're mentally not stable.
Yeah.
So you quickly learn to shut up. And so, but yet there's another medical doctor, brilliant man, brilliant man, and he's had almost tenfold type of experiences as Dr. Melinda Greer, except he still wishes not to go public. But he's become a very good friend of mine. But he's had some unbelievable experiences. And so these experiences are very common. I just highlighted a couple of medical doctors just to bring the credibility to it. Because this man that I mentioned, he's an emergency room physician at a major urban center where you get stabbings and people that are on the brink of death all the time. And I've spoken to a couple of his colleagues, and without mentioning his experiences, just to find out a little bit more about him. And they said he's the most gifted ER physician that they've ever had at that hospital. And so just to let you know, these are highly functional individuals, but yet they've been very quiet about their experiences.
Yeah.
So this happens to policemen, firefighters, school teachers, housewives, you name it. All type of people are having these experiences, but the vast majority, including the people that took our surveys, the 4,350 people, the vast majority of them have always been quiet.
Yeah. What's interesting is that you mentioned that, they're high performing, some brilliant scientists and doctors, but also ordinary folks. But I would argue probably that they are brilliant in whatever field they are pursuing. I mean, having read Dr. Pasulka's work and others, it seems like a lot of the time the people who are on the most advanced edge of whatever science they're in often seem to be contactees. My question to you is, given your experience and interaction with the phenomenon, do you feel like they're chosen for that reason, or what do you think the relationship is between the brilliance and the talent of some of the people who are claiming these experiences and the fact that they're the ones having them and not, so many of the skeptics who scoff?
Well, I've researched the team that I work with at the Dr. Mitchell Free Foundation, thousands of people. And so I would have a different opinion than what you just stated. These are
Okay.
not people on the edge of brilliance. And these are just the whole gambit of humanity.
Yeah.
It comes in all cultures, all professions, all shapes and colors. We have whites, blacks, Hispanics, Asian, you name it. So it runs the whole gambit of human culture.
Yeah.
And so in terms of the reason why, what I've come closest to was that if someone has had a paranormal experience, whether they've died, had an NDE in return, whether they had an out-of-body experience, whether they've seen a UFO, whether they saw their Aunt Matilda 2 days after she died, that these types of paranormal experiences somehow triggers additional paranormal experiences.
Yeah.
It's like once you've been brought to the edge of reality, you sort of cross that barrier, that plane, into this other external reality. Then it seems like you no longer have like a concrete block preventing the information streams from this other reality to interact with you. All of a sudden, you're now like a sponge. You're much more porous. And you find that with a lot of people, as I said before, that have had an initial experience with one of the contact modalities, what you find is that later on, they begin to have additional paranormal experiences. And I quickly referenced the UFO phenomenon, how most of these people began to have paranormal experiences after they saw the UFO. Same thing with the NDE phenomenon. You go to an NDE conference and you talk to NDE experiencers and you ask them, okay, after your NDE, did you begin to have paranormal phenomena? Did your ESP experiences heighten? Did you have a heightened sense of premonition? Did you begin to see dead people? Did you have out-of-body experiences? And again, the vast majority of these people would say, yes, one or more of what you just mentioned. Same thing with the out-of-body folks that started having out-of-body experiences. And people that saw dead people. One key example of that is Preston Dennett, who co-authored an article on medical healings with Dr. Joseph Burks, our joint friend. His initial trigger was seeing his dead mother in his living room. This is like 2 days after she died. And then after he had that initial experience, then he ran the gambit. He began to see UFOs. He saw other deceased people. He began having out-of-body experiences. He began seeing other forms of non-human intelligence. And now what he's been doing over the last 20 years, he's been having these very profound astral travel experiences, very similar to what Tam Campbell has described in all of his videos and his books and his writings. And basically, Preston sort of lives between two worlds. And same thing happened with this one medical doctor that I referenced to you before. It all began with an out-of-body experience, and then began a lifetime of astral travel experiences. And so, what I think is what triggers this is having one of the different contact modality experiences. And if you've had that, then you seem to like open a portal to another reality. And once that portal is open, you no longer have a concrete barrier around your physical body and your consciousness. All of a sudden, it's porous, and you're able to interact with the external reality. That's sort of the best that I can explain to anyone else. But again, we just don't have the data to back that up. I only have anecdotal case histories of hundreds of people that I've spoken with. And but in terms of being able to come up with a formal hypothesis, test it out with data, you need to engage in what I had proposed several years ago to the members of CCRI, which is undertaking a comprehensive academic statistical research study followed by in-depth interviews, one-on-one interviews with experiencers, major experiencers of the contact modalities. And by major experiencers, I mean individuals that have had a UFO experience, they've had an NDE, they've had an out-of-body experience, they've seen dead people, they have are experienced remote viewers or have that ability. So if you've had maybe 3 out of those 5, that's how I would categorize a major experiencer. So we would have to interview these people in depth and do a very systematic, holistic, detailed interview together with detailed surveys of hundreds of these people. Then you'll be able to test out some of these hypotheses.
Do you view, is that what you would consider the next step for CCRI, as sort of moving in that direction, or what's impeding the progress there, if anything?
Well, I didn't send you, but I can send you a document that was developed in February of 2020 after a series, of research committee meetings of CCRI. We had proposals from 12 academics. And the idea is, okay, if you were to study this, the thesis that consciousness is primary and that all of the paranormal contact modalities are interrelated and are somehow one phenomenon under consciousness, which is an idealist approach. And if you were to do that using major contact experiencers, not just people that have only had NDEs, people have only had UFO contact, only out of body experience, whatever, but people that have had multiple number of these types of experiences, how would you go about doing that? So we received 12 proposals, and mine was one of them. And so that's where we were heading. But then the pandemic hit in 2020, and then people took a couple of years to recover from that. I subsequently retired from my work. I underwent the divorce. I then moved to Colombia, the country of Colombia. So it's now we're getting back on track, and we're ready to move into that direction. But what we wanted to do was all of the academics that were part of CCRI, we thought it was important to be able to present these concepts, these ideas, in a book format. And so we developed a 2-volume theoretical book series titled A Greater Reality, The New Paradigm of Non-Local Consciousness, the Paranormal, and the Contact Modalities. And as I said earlier, it has approximately 40 articles written primarily by PhD academics on the topic of idealism, consciousness, and on the separate contact modalities, why they need to be seen as one integrated phenomenon. For example, just on the topic of UFOs, we have 12 articles just on UFOs, and all of them approach UFOs from a non-materialist perspective. And then NDEs, obviously, anyone that's had an NDE or that has studied NDEs, these people are not materialists. Raymond Moody, the co-editor of our book, Dr. Jeffrey Long, all of the other authors in our book that are NDE specialists, these people are not materialists. They're fall under a specific approach within idealism. And Jeffrey Mishloff, somebody's mentioned that names that you mentioned.
Yeah.
These are not materialists.
Nope.
And so, and so, what our book is trying to present is the contrary approach of materialism as to the paranormal. And Dr. Edgar Mitchell, if I could give him some praise at this point, he wrote a book in 1974. My Alzheimer's is kicking in. Can't remember the name, but it was a 650-page book. And it discussed almost all of the psi phenomenon and most of the paranormal phenomenon, except for UFOs and NDEs. And later on, he told me NDEs was not mentioned because Raymond Moody made the term NDE well known in 1975 with his book Life After Life.
Yeah.
And Edgar published his book in 1974. And also UFOs. He told me there had never been a formal academic study on the UFO phenomenon, let alone the UFO contact phenomenon. It was our study, which is published in a book, Beyond UFOs, that was the first formal, comprehensive, academic, statistical, multi-language research study on the UFO contact phenomenon. And no one has done anything since. We were the only game in town.
Yeah.
And all of the work in ufology, as you very well know, it's all coming from a materialist perspective.
Yeah. Well, so let's talk about that free study. I mean, it's 4,300 experiencers who lay out what they experienced and how it sort of evolved over time and that sort of thing. Can you talk a little bit about, first of all, what surprised you about the results of that and how that ultimately led to the place that you are now with the contact modalities as being different strains or varieties of the same kind of experience?
Okay. First of all, the majority of the researchers and academics that were involved with the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Free Experiential Research Study, these individuals were not ufologists, the majority of them. Some of them were. For example, we needed to bring in the people who had a background in studying UFO contactees, because Dr. Edgar Mitchell, Dr. Rudy Shields, Mary Rodwell, Dr. John Climo, and several other academics involved with the Free Foundation. We clearly understood that all of the paranormal needs to be studied as one integrated phenomenon. But we also knew that the NDE phenomenon, there was lots of data, lots of research study that was focusing on NDEs for many years. The two most prolific academic researchers, Dr. Bruce Grayson and Dr. Kenneth Ring, had been publishing research for over 20 years. And so both of these individuals are not materialists because originally they started as materialists.
Yeah, but the research changed their mind.
The research changed their mind, correct.
Yeah.
And so we knew that with NDEs, there was lots of data out there. And Dr. Jeffrey Long, who's one of the co-authors of A Greater Reality, same thing. He started off as a rationalist, as a regular medical doctor. And as he began studying the phenomenon over now close to 25 years, he a totally different mindset. He's an idealist now. And and then for the NDE, if you look at the NDE approaches, not anywhere near academic statistical research studies as the NDE phenomenon, but there had been quite a few publications on the out-of-body experience phenomenon. And in terms of remote viewing, there was lots of academic research on remote viewing. And that really was triggered by Edgar was one of the integral people in the beginnings of remote viewing at the Stanford Research Institute with Hal Puthoff and Russell Tarr. He was very, very much a player in that, as well as Dr. Jacques Vallée and many others. So there are numerous publications in the remote viewing arena. In terms of ghosts and spirits, that's been studied since the dawn of mankind. Many of the Greek philosophers talked about, the deceased, and then late 1800s, that whole time period talked about mediumship, communicating with the deceased.
Spiritualism.
Spiritualism. Yeah. So there were lots of writings on that. But when it came to the UFO phenomenon, there was nothing. Zippo. What you had was these crazy lunatics that were doing hypnotic regressions on individuals, people like Bud Hopkins and David Jacobs, who had a totally biased approach, because their approach was that the whole UFO phenomenon was a materialist phenomenon. These are, little green men coming from some alien planet, and they're here to take over us and to produce hybrid babies. It's a totally negative perspective. But then when you talk to the actual people that have had these experiences, they're like the total opposite. And so, but yet that genre, that mindset was the mindset that was put forth at all of the major UFO conferences, and including to today, what you see on the internet. And, ancient aliens, all these people who are so-called UFO experts, they're all materialists. And when they view the contact phenomenon, they view it from a negative perspective. Why? Because the data was never published before of what the UFO contact experiencer went through over their lifetime. And so what we did is we decided to start off with the UFO phenomenon, with the assumption that the UFO phenomenon is part of a larger system under consciousness, which we call the contact modalities. And again, if anyone wants to understand these concepts, they can go to our website. Our website is agreaterreality.com. agreaterreality.com.
I'll have that linked in the description as well, so people can get it from there. Just so
thank you.
Know.
As well as the articles in our books, A Greater Reality, and our books Beyond UFOs. Most of our books are there in that website, so you can educate yourself about what I'm talking about.
And there is a wealth of material. It's stunning how much research you guys have done and the work you put to synthesize it all. So you're to be commended for that.
No one is doing it. And this concept, as I said before, of idealism. These are concepts that Tom Campbell has been presenting for over 20 years. Bernard Castro now for at least 10 years.
Yeah.
And now they're in their podcast, they're beginning to talk about the paranormal. Yeah. They're beginning to talk about the UFO phenomenon, similar to what I've mentioned years ago, back in 2013. But now they're starting to talk about it publicly. Before, they never discussed these topics. So I've been discussing these topics since 2013. But yet, all of the academics that I have been interacting with, they all believe the same thing. And let me get into that one topic because it's very, very important.
Sure.
How this developed.
Yeah, please.
Back in 2013, I was having, for the next 4 years, I said after that March 4th, 2012 experience, a series of almost nonstop paranormal experiences. One of them involved having an out-of-body experience, more an astral travel experience, while I was stuck in the middle of a traffic jam in heading to work one day, right next to Miami Airport, where I was literally taken outside of space-time to another reality. And I was shown what I'm talking about now, that all of what is commonly called the paranormal, that all of it needs to be seen as one integrated phenomenon under consciousness. And I won't go into those details, but I talk about it a little bit about it in my book, The Mind of God.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in volume 3, I'm going to go into detail. I'm going to discuss in more detail my experiences. The Mind of God, actually, very briefly talked about my experiences.
It's a great book,
but it's thank you. And so and so I was brought to another reality where I was shown all these things, just like Tom Campbell, a brilliant man.
And he has the big toe, right? My big theory of everything.
Correct.
Yeah.
My big toe, correct. And it's close to 700 pages. And that's why I knew once I started learning about this, what happened to me, and I started learning that, look, there's other people that think exactly the same way that I do, that I knew that I wasn't, going crazy, that these experiences are very, very real, and that others are having very similar experiences. And so after that experience, within 48 hours, I was introduced by the Mind of God, this universal intelligence, to the 4 co-founders of the Free Foundation, to Mary Rodwell, to Dr. Rudy Seals, who is an emeritus professor of astrophysics at Harvard University for over 45 years.
Wow.
And to the late Apollo 14 astronaut, Dr. Edgar Mitchell. And these are 4 brilliant people. And Rudy, if you can imagine, this man was an astrophysicist at Harvard for over 45 years. And Edgar Mitchell, sixth man to walk on the moon, PhD from MIT. He started the Institute of Noetic Sciences, which is now the world's most well-known academic research institute on psi and consciousness. And Dr. Dean Radin has been the academic director of that for more than 20 years now. And so anyway, after that experience, I was introduced to these three individuals, and they in turn introduced me to other academics. And then eventually this organization, which became known as the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Free Foundation, got started. And so then I began having a series of conversations with numerous of these PhDs. Some of them I already mentioned before, Dr. Jeffrey Mishloff, Dr. Dean Radin, Dr. Evan Alexander. Edgar introduced me to him. They had co-founded an NDE organization titled Eternia. Edgar introduced me to other physicists because he had an organization titled Quantrack at that time before he died. And then both Edgar and Dr. John Klimo introduced me to numerous very well-known parapsychologists. And I won't introduce, mention all these names, but there were many of them. And so I began asking all of these individuals questions of, do you believe that consciousness is primary? And all of them said, yes. Well, do you believe that all of the paranormal is one phenomenon under consciousness? Yes. Okay. But right now they're being studied separately. No, it shouldn't. It needs to be studied as one integrated phenomenon. Well, I want to read the book about it. And they'll say, well, the book doesn't exist. Well, I want to read the academic article that discusses that.
Yeah.
Well, Ray, I've written articles about this concept where it has little bits and pieces introducing these concepts, but not a formal article discussing it. They've all said the same thing to me. No one has ever done this before. And to me, that was so, eye-popping. It just struck me as crazy, because this is the most fundamental question that humanity is dealing with. What is the nature of our reality? And especially the contact phenomenon. And yet no one has written a book about it, let alone an article on it. So it was at that point that I realized that what was given to me in that out-of-body experience, I knew what we had to do. So we had to focus on that question. But then is, how do you start? Okay. So we had zero data on the UFO contact phenomenon. Zero. No one has ever done any type of statistical academic research study on the UFO contactee, the contact phenomenon. All of the approach was on, we saw UFO here, we saw there, UFO there, Rendlesham Forest, Roswell, all this materialist approach. And then the only non-materialist, I would say the only contactee approach was the hypnotic regression approach by these two quacks that I mentioned, okay, and many other people that followed their lead. And so I proposed to Edgar Mitchell, Rudy Shields, Mary Rodwell, and then by then the many other professors we had. Let's start off with a formal academic research study of the UFO contact phenomenon. And then after we get that data, then we can compare it to the contact phenomenon of NDEs.
Absolutely.
To the contact phenomenon of OBEs, to the contact phenomenon of remote viewing. Because in all of these paranormal phenomenon, there's contact with some type of non-human intelligence, okay? So that's what we did. We spent 5 years from the very beginning to the very end. We spent 9 months developing the research methodology. And I had given them a 6-page single-space memo of an initial research methodology. And that's pretty much what we went forward. Because, mind you, I went to Berkeley for a PhD. I know how to do statistical research study. Dr. John Klimo actually taught statistical research study for PhD students
So
for
not
40 years.
Not a bunch of amateurs, people who know how to work in this.
No. Yeah. If you go for a PhD and you're in the social sciences or the hard sciences, you're going to be taking, at least mid-level, graduate level statistical work.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so we all had that background. And then later on, Dr. Bob Davis joined us. He's a retired PhD professor of neuroscience, a professor of the brain. Okay, he got his PhD from Ohio State, and he's taught at the State University of New York for 35 years. And so that's all he did. It was just statistical research work on neuroscience. So we had all these brilliant minds working together. And so we developed 3 surveys. The first 2 surveys were quantitative in nature, which was, select one of these answers, A, B, C, D, or E, or yes or no. And then we also had a qualitative instrument, which was where they had to write out responses to open-ended questions. And so we had 70 open-ended questions, and we developed almost 750 quantitative questions. It was a huge research study. And so we had tons of data. Poor Dr. John Climo was responsible for analyzing the data for our qualitative instrument, which is the written responses to 70 open-ended questions. And he spent 9 months reviewing that data, and he wound up writing 200 pages, which was chapter 2 in our book, Beyond UFOs. It was mind-boggling, what he did.
Where did you find these folks? I mean, if you don't mind me asking, to break in the flow.
Oh, these are folks that Edgar Mitchell knew, that Rudy Shield had known. Mind you, Edgar knew of all of these parapsychologists because that was his field.
Yeah.
Through the Institute for Noetic Sciences. Okay. Dean Radin knew some of these people. John Climo knew Dean Radin as a friend. Had spoken with him hundreds of times. Jeffrey Mishloff. As a matter of fact, it was Edgar Mitchell that called Dean Radin. He said, "Look, Dean, I'm working with this young man, Ray Hernandez. We're doing this work. It's a fundamental work. I want you to invite him out there to ION so he can give a lecture." That's exactly what happened. So these are the type of close relationships that they introduced us to, and to individuals. And Dean was a member, still is a member of the CCRI. And so, so what we did is we published it in 4 major languages, and but our book Beyond UFOs only contains the data from 4,350 people from our English language survey, and we had numerous major research findings. But I can give you a very, very quick summary, just of the most important ones.
Yes, do that, please.
Number one, the UFO fields, the perception is that these are negative experiences. Okay?
That's the number one thing, right? I mean, like, you talk about the abduction phenomenon and the work of Bud Hopkins and David Jacobs and whatnot. The idea in pop culture right now is that people are taken on board a spaceship, they're probed, they're roughed up. I mean, they're in this kind of space that seems sort of surreal, and then they leave, and they may or may not have injuries, but that's it. And that's not what you found, right?
No, not at all. Yeah. Again, the people that write these books from the abduction phenomenon, let the audience members know. Bud Hopkins and David Jacobs, okay, they pre-selected their candidates to hypnotically regress. If you had a neutral experience or a positive experience, they want nothing to do with you. Subsequently, I've spoke with over 50 people that had gone to David Jacobs or Bud Hopkins. Once they found out that their experience was positive, they were never called back. They said, maybe you need to see Barbara Lamb. Maybe you need to see Leo Sprinkle. These people had a different approach to it, okay? A more positive approach. And then the tapes were released of the interviews of David Jacobs. And it was filled with leading questions after another, tons of them, okay? And even in all of his interviews, okay, David Jacobs and Bud Hopkins would state they have never met now one person that's had a positive experience. Not one, okay? And people like Richard Dolan have followed the lead. They said, oh, David Jacobs is the best researcher in this field. And yet he's considered the top ufologist out there, okay? So, I mean, as I say in statistics, garbage in, garbage out.
Right.
That's the common statistical concept. So it's garbage into the phenomenon, and what you get is garbage. What we encountered was the total opposite of what these people were presenting. First of all, 80% of these people viewed their experiences as highly positive over the long term. Initially, 37% viewed their experiences as negative. Okay. And that was if you saw a being in front of you, you're going to be, defecating in your pants, Um, but yet over time, the beings started communicating with them. They started having lessons being taught to them, being brought to other realities, given lessons, usually lessons about spirituality, about the afterlife, things of that sort. And so their experiences from the very beginning to the very end totally changed. But that was only 37% viewed their experiences as negative.
Yeah.
Okay, in the beginning. Towards the end, it was less than 5% viewed their experiences as negative.
Wow.
That's it.
Yeah.
Okay, there was a large chunk, like 20%, that viewed it as neutral, but the rest were positive experiences. Number two, the abduction phenomenon. Only 1/3 of the people experience what is commonly called an abduction phenomenon. And that is because if you've had 35 years of being indoctrinated with the abduction phenomenon, people are going to be viewing their experiences how? From the abduction phenomenon. Okay?
Yeah.
For example, Whitley Strieber, okay?
Yeah.
Kathleen Martin, okay? These are two close friends of mine.
Mm-hmm.
These were probably the major researchers that talked about the adoption phenomenon.
Yeah.
Okay? Whitley Strieber's book Communion was the #1 bestseller for many, many years in the field of ufology. Probably still is.
Yeah, it was the first book I read on the subject, actually, years and years ago.
Yeah, most people like that. And Kathleen Martin's first book was on the Benny and Barney Hill abduction phenomenon. It was titled what? Captured. Okay.
Yeah.
The most recent books are spiritual books. Okay. Whitley Strieber's last two books are all about spirituality. Kathleen Martin's book is titled From Alien Abduction to Spiritual Transformation. Okay.
Well,
So
and Whitley also has the experience with his wife, Anne. I mean, she passed away, and his encounters have gone to include interactions with her, messages from her, and it's totally changed his life.
It's common.
Yeah.
What he's the typical UFO contact experience.
Yeah.
Okay, and we've documented that in our research study. So what you get is most of these people that had what they perceived to be a UFO abduction phenomenon towards the end, they're Mr. Love and Light. Okay, total spirituality. The abduction stuff, only 7% remain fearful. These are usually the people that have only had one or two experiences. They've had this initial experience, which was fearful, and they haven't had anything since then, or maybe one other experience. And they still interpret it from that fear-based mentality. Okay, that's it. But yet, that's what's being presented. Number three, these experiences involve a manipulation of space-time. Okay, clearly. And that's what makes these experiences common to NDEs, to OBEs, to remote viewing, seeing deceased people, etc. And Jacques Vallée was the first one to point that out in his book, Passport to Magonia. He clearly stated, this is 45 years ago, the UFO phenomenon involves a manipulation of space-time. That was introduced previous to that by Dr. J. Allen Hynek, the last years of his life. He said that these experiences are both physical, they're both material, but they're also psychic. That's another word for consciousness-based, okay?
Yeah.
And that involves the manipulation of space-time. So you have the two most important ufologists over the last 40 years state the same thing. But yet, where is the field of ufology today? Okay, they never mentioned that latter part of J. Allen Hynek. They never mentioned Jacques Vallée. Jacques Vallée has been ostracized from the field of ufology for the last 40 years, pretty much. Why? Because his approach is these are not little green men coming from some type of physical alien planet doing alien abduction on us. Okay, it's something much more complicated involving a manipulation of space-time. Okay, and so also another major finding was that these experiences resulted in the complete transformation of the experiencer. We're talking about spirituality. We're talking about they don't care about money anymore. Okay, the importance of physical things. They became much more loving, much more caring, much more kind. We asked 70 questions, and these were taken by Dr. Kenneth Ring's book titled The Omega Project. because he was the first one to ever do a statistical research study comparing the NDE experiencer with the UFO contact experiencer.
Yeah.
He had 85 people in each of these two sample groups. And he didn't ask a lot of questions. It was maybe less than 100 questions dealing with these transformational type of questions. And so he didn't have a large sample. He only had 85 UFO contact experiencers. We had 4,350.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, huge numbers. What we did is we validated his research findings. What he discovered was that 85% of both the NDE experiencers and the UFO contact experiencers changed in exactly the same way. Exactly the same way. Much more spiritual, much more loving, less religious. Money was not important anymore. They didn't care about being famous. I go out
Their
through
fear of
70
death.
different questions.
Yeah, their fear of death disappears.
Greatly diminished.
Yeah.
Correct. And so, and again, this is both NDE experiences, which what you would expect, but also the UFO contact experiencer. So what I did is I called Dr. Kenneth Ring, not called, I emailed him. We had a very lengthy conversation, and we still to this day, even though he's getting quite old, and he shut himself off from the NDE research field. I asked him to borrow those 70 questions. He allowed us. So we put those 70 questions in our research study. That's why I'm able to say that we duplicated all of his findings.
Yeah, yeah.
And that was just one component of our research study. So I could go on and on the entire day.
That's great.
Going over our data, but that gives you a baseline to be able to begin to understand the profoundness of this work.
Yeah, and I think that it helps to refer people to the actual work. I mean, it'll whet their appetites, give you a sense of the insights that were gained, and then get people back into the actual documents, which I think is ultimately what you would like. I'd like to get a little bit into the why. Do you think, I mean, given your research and your own experience, that this is a relatively new intrusion into this reality by whatever this greater reality is, or is this something that's been ongoing for a long time? And if it is new, why now?
I think this has been going on since the dawn of mankind.
Okay.
We're talking about, the whole shamanic tradition.
Sure.
Are individuals that are communicating with this greater mind for many, many years. It's been interpreted as from different ways, like in the indigenous cultures, they would talk to, the god of rain, the god of fire. When you would kill an animal, you would bless the animal's soul and go off to another level of reality, and they thank it, for feeding their family. So all these indigenous cultures communicated with the afterlife. They communicated with this greater reality. They all saw a higher power beyond our physical material realities. And so what we're doing is we're just catching up, basically. And also all of the major ancient cultures, they believed in some form of idealism. Starting, well, let's say with the Vedic tradition of ancient India.
Absolutely.
For 8,000 years, you read all of the Vedic literature. It talks about the one mind of God, the universal consciousness, and in grand detail. You talk about Middle Eastern philosophy. You talk about Greek philosophy, ancient Greek philosophy. Most of these people were idealists. Same thing with many of the Roman philosophers. These were an idealist perspective, consciousness-based perspective, in other words. But yet, over since really the medieval times, when scientific reductionism started getting a foothold, then all of that's being withered away. But now, thank God to a lot of intellectuals, it's slowly being introduced. That's why our book, A Greater Reality, is titled The New Paradigm. Okay, and that's what it is. It's a new paradigm, which it's very, very difficult for people to understand. But yet, there are many people that are starting to talk about. People like, as I said before, Dean Radin, Jeffrey Mishloff, Bernardo. We're talking about Tom Campbell, Edgar Mitchell before he passed away, and really hundreds of other people. at different levels of academia and non-academia research that are discussing this topic. So what I am known for was that I introduced the concept of non-local consciousness, a greater reality with the paranormal.
Yeah.
And I gave it the term, the contact modalities. I was the first one to use that term, and really the first one to associate this at a larger scale in terms of academic articles and books, to approach it that way. But I'm very glad now, most recently over the last year, that Bernardo Castro has, in his recent interviews, is introducing the concept of the paranormal into his lectures. Tom Campbell recently is starting to introduce the topic of UFOs, of NDEs, into his lectures. As a matter of fact, Tom Campbell wrote a chapter in our book, A Greater Reality, because I had a conversation with him, and I said, Tom, you and I think exactly the same way. And a lot of people just don't understand your work because it's so abstract, it's so dense, so academic, and very complicated. So if you could do it in a shortened version so the layperson can understand it. And he wound up writing a 16-page paper on his theories, which is almost impossible to do. but it's in our book. It's available for free.
Yeah.
Go to our website, agreaterreality.com. You'll see in volume 1, which is a section on idealism, an article by Tom Campbell.
Yeah.
And I highly encourage everyone to take a look at it, because Tom really, just like with Edgar Mitchell, Dr. Gary Schwartz, Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove, Dr. Bruce Grayson, all of the people that wrote chapters for A Greater Reality. These are all pioneers.
Yeah.
These are all brilliant thinkers. Stephanie Schwartz. Very few people know about him. The people that know of his work are just blown away. He's also an idealist.
I guess
his focuses have been on remote viewing.
Yeah. My question, though, I mean, I'm trying to get a sense of, people talk about, like, oftentimes they're getting a message from contact experiences that are environmental, or they involve, like, pushing humanity to kind of to grow outside of its materialist paradigm, but also kind of the selfish and ecologically destructive behaviors it has. So I'm trying to get a sense of, do you have any idea or any notion of what the motive is coming from that contact? Okay. And then also, well, that's good enough, I think.
Yeah. And now I get the gist of your earlier question.
Yeah.
So I apologize for that.
No worries, man. Not at all.
That's
Please.
exactly how I started my book, The Mind of God. I started off with a quote from Dr. Edgar Mitchell.
Yeah.
Basically, the quote stated that humanity needs to change, okay, the way it conducts itself, because we're heading towards a path of self-destruction.
Yeah.
Okay. And what I argue is that this quickening, okay, this awakening of humanity. Why is this happening now?
Yeah.
I give the reason why it's happening now in my book, A Greater Reality.
Yep.
Why it's happening now is that human is heading towards a path of total destruction. Okay, not total destruction, but a great thinning of humanity. And many of the contact experiencers have gotten that message. I've gotten that message very clear.
Yeah.
A lot of near-death experiencers have gotten that message in their NDE. Okay, they got to see the partial destruction of humanity. But we're talking about hundreds of NDE experiences, as well as UFO contact experiences. And what I wrote about was that, for example, let me give you a very clear, concrete example, okay? The global warming, okay? The United Nations has an organization that's made up of hundreds of, thousands, several thousand climatologists, okay? They're all unanimously in agreement that the rising seas from global warming is going to be inundating the vast majority of the major coastlines of the world, okay, within 50 years, okay? So let's look just at the US. We're talking about New York City, Boston, Philadelphia, Miami, okay? Numerous cities. That's just the East Coast, okay? And then when you're talking around the world, look at in Europe, all the major cities that are on the coast, okay? That are not in elevated terrain, okay? These cities are not going to be functioning, starting not to function within 50 years. Within 100 years, they'll be non-functioning, okay? Why? Because the major glaciologists and other academic research studies on climate have stated this academically in thousands of peer-reviewed academic papers. So that's just one component of it. Then you get the nuclear proliferation, okay? Well, what are the aspects of a nuclear war? Okay, you're going to have total self-destruction of the country that's launching the nuclear weapon and the country that retaliates. So you're going to have massive destruction of humanity, let alone the ecological factors of the nuclear fallout. Okay, and then you have other factors of growing inequalities of humanity.
That's another thing I was going to ask you. Dr. Joseph Birx likes to talk about, and rightfully so, that we have an imbalance that's growing with an elite sort of class of human beings that make all the decisions and have all the money versus everyone else. And he believes that that's one of the problems that they're trying to address also, and it sounds like you agree.
Well, I wrote about that first.
Okay, well, there you go.
In our book. And then,
he's probably quoting
Joseph,
you.
Well, Joseph always agreed with this.
Yeah,
okay?
yeah.
What I did is I provided the statistics, the academic research behind that.
Yeah.
And so there's tons of academic research by Nobel Prize winning economists that have talked about this.
Yeah.
These are not radical socialists here, okay?
No.
So this data exists. So if you picture that all around the world, it's not just in the US, what you get is an increasing global disparity of the haves and the have-nots. So when you add the ecological, chaos that's going to take place, 100% certain, when you add the potential for nuclear annihilation, when you add the growing economic disparities, what you get is a high probability of human self-destruction. And so what is happening with the mind of God, it's giving us a warning in many, many different ways that, look, this is what's going to come. You need to change. You need to become much more loving, much more spiritual. One of Tom Campbell's major messages that he has gotten while he was out of body was love, the importance of love. He discusses in terms of entropy. That's how I got it as well, out of body, in terms of physics discussion, in terms of entropy and the concept of love, that it balances out the fluctuation of human behavior, and that we need to promote more spirituality and more love, okay? And what do UFO contactees, what we discovered, 80% of these people, same thing. They've got spiritual messages. We need to become much more loving, much more caring. NDE, the major, okay, finding of NDE research, the message that these people get while they were out of body during their NDE is the importance of love, okay? Once we return here, it's not how much money we have, okay, not what religion we are, how famous we are. What is most important is that we need to learn how to love, okay? And so here you get the same message from NDE experiencers, from UFO contact experiencers, and also from the major OBE experiencers have told me this. We cannot quantify it because no one has ever done this type of quantifiable statistical research study, but I can talk about it anecdotally from the major experiencers that I've spoken with, and also from our free research data of 4,300 people. 80% of these people came away with the importance of humanity needs to change to become much more loving. So I think that's the major message that's taking place with this awakening of humanity, is that we need to change. If not, we're going to be destroying much of humanity of what we understand it to be.
I have one more question for you. We're about out of time, but real quick, I mean, we've all been kind of absorbed in the ongoing congressional hearings and the statements made by various whistleblowers and all of that sort of thing. I wonder what your take is with your how you see it in terms of a spiritual or an encouragement from this greater reality to sort of be more loving and to have a more positive effect on the world. Do you think that's all a waste of time, or is that a battle that we need to be fighting even harder? I mean, where do you stand?
Well, I'm a very blunt person, extremely blunt, and I get criticized for being extremely blunt.
I like blunt.
But most of these so-called whistleblowers are totally clueless. Why? Because their mindset is a mindset of a materialist. They just see a physical UFO, physical experiences. They interpret everything from a physicalist perspective. And that's not the approach of Dr. Jacques Vallée. The late J. Allen Hynek, the last few years before his death, of Dr. Edgar Mitchell, the last few years before his death, and numerous of these major ufologists. And so these people are totally clueless, but yet society, that's what they turn to. And the ancient aliens crowd or these congressional whistleblowers, okay? And what we know is that the phenomenon is both physicalist and both consciousness based. Once you see your Aunt Sally in front of you in your living room, you realize that is Aunt Sally real or not real? Is she physical or not physical? Okay, what you realize upon studying the phenomenon that is both. Hold on a second. I'm just going to be, and it's both, and that's what these physicalists just don't understand. That this is an extremely complicated discussion, and in 1 hour we can't, go into the details of this complication, but we can start, which we have had,
which we have done, and I appreciate your time, sir. Thank you for your patience in trying to get your internet set up and the email exchanges back and forth, and for all the work that you've done. I think that you've made a major contribution to the effort for humanity to kind of understand this stuff. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. And in the future, we can talk about a greater reality.
Yeah, absolutely.
In detail.
I'd like to have you back. I'll keep an email and we'll figure out when to do that.
Okay, excellent. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Have a good day.
You too.